Hey guys, it's Sarah from Just My Typewriter, and I went antiquing again. I'm not going to say thrifting because there was nothing thrifty about where I went. So I've lived on the eastern side of Pennsylvania for almost 2 years, going on year 3, I guess soon, and I've never made it to the Jersey Shore, which I guess is a rite of passage when you're this close to the beach. So I decided to go to the Jersey Shore, and along the way I hit a few antique stores. Now there are quite a few entrances to the Jersey Shore and Jersey beaches along the coast, but I decided to go to Asbury Park because that's where they have quite a few different antique stores. I started this trip by stopping at a record store about 45 minutes from the shore. This was in Millerstown, and this place was called Revilla Grooves and Gear. There are quite a few interesting records here, and they did have a record test, which I thought was really interesting, where you could test the high fidelity of your record player. I didn't end up getting this, but I thought it was really interesting. And then I stopped for necessary fuel, and by fuel I mean Dunkin'. I then drove the rest of the way to Asbury Park, and I stopped in the town of Asbury because that's where they have their Antiques Emporium. Now, anytime I go to antique stores, I film everything, obviously, but I'm also looking around these antique stores to see what kind of price ranges they're in. When you go to antique stores, depending on the location, you could find really cheap booths and really expensive booths, and sometimes you run into antique stores that are just very expensive in general, and this was one of those experiences. Asbury Park is a pretty classy area, and they have quite a few high-end stores and retailers here. So trips like this are more like tours of antique stores than they are buying adventures. I did run into a few items here that I thought were really interesting. And for me, checking the prices of typewriters in these places is always a really good gauge of what their prices are like. These typewriters were in the $100 range or over $100 range. Obviously, that's outside of my price range, but it does kind of give me an idea of what they value their items at in this antique store. And it did have quite a few places in here. It was a pretty large antique store or antique emporium with quite a few interesting items. One of the most interesting items to me was this museum display. So this was from an actual museum, and it came with the panels on the front that you could attach to it. And I thought that was a really cool piece of history to see in an antique store. I also stopped at another record store, which was right next door to the Antiques Emporium. This is Groovy Graveyard. They specialize in like movie posters and records that have a little bit of that goofy pop culture horror feel to them. And it was really interesting to kind of dig around in their stash. I did find quite a few records that I thought were interesting, but I didn't end up purchasing anything. And the final stop for me as far as antiques go was a salvage yard. Now, I have been wanting to go to a salvage yard for years. I did start to kind of plan a trip to Hudson, New York, where there's another large salvage yard, but I found this I found this place called Salvage Angel by the Sea, and I didn't really know what I was getting into when I pulled up to this antique store, but I wanted to go in and just kind of see what was there and figure out what their prices are like. Sometimes you look at places like thrift stores and salvage yards and you can get pretty good deals on really great antiques or building materials that have just not been used very well. They serve a really interesting purpose, especially when it comes to refurnishing a home. But I was a little bit taken aback by my experience here. It is massive. This place is huge with multiple floors, a full yard in the front full of bathtubs, and it was almost completely overwhelming to walk through the different lanes within this salvage store. I also thought it was really interesting the way it was set up because all these items were grouped together by type. So we have a wall of clocks, all their dishes, all of their fireplaces. And so that made it a little bit easier to kind of go through these aisles and know where you were going or what you were looking at. I didn't have to dig through the whole store to find their typewriter stash. It was all in one place together. The other thing that was interesting about this salvage yard is that instead of pricing every individual item, they have a policy where you go through, take pictures of the things that you like, and then at the end you ask the owner what her prices are on these items, and she'll give you a running list of what everything's going to cost. So that was a little bit different as well. Going through this experience, you don't know what anything is going to cost. So I didn't know if it was going to be really affordable or very, very, very expensive. And it was very, very, very expensive. So I did find some really interesting items throughout the store, and I was just amazed and shocked at the types of materials they had here. Anything you could possibly want for refurnishing a home. I think this has a tremendous value in providing kind of a safe place for these items to go. Things like tiles for your bathroom, or bathtubs, or retro sinks, or doorknobs. All of these items that are so well built in older homes that when they get torn down, they're just kind of thrown away. All of them get to kind of live here, and I think that's a great thing for people who are interested in those materials or those items and want that antique touch or want to rescue some of these older items. I then did find the typewriter stash, and I was kind of blown away by what was here. Now, I have regrets about this. I found an Olivetti Valentine here in this salvage yard, and I didn't open the case, and I am so mad at myself that I did not check inside the case. I saw the Olivetti Valentine. These were really difficult to get to. They were in between a suitcase wall and art supplies. There was a ladder in the way, so I had to crawl over them to get in there. And I was looking at the cases. There were a few Olympias in here as well. I saw an ultra portable. There was an IBM on its side, and I wanted just to see what was there. The problem with having them stored like this is that it's not very easy to check what's inside the cases, and if you're just kind of passing by, you might not even know what's there. For example, the Olivetti Valentine that I ran into was stacked on top of the other machines here. If I didn't go back there to look at it, I never would have seen it from the side. So I was blown away by finding this machine. And I have found some really interesting machines along the way that I just never thought I would get to see. Things like Hermes machines, I never thought I'd get to see any of those in person, and I found them in antique malls in Reading, Pennsylvania. Didn't know how they got there, but I found them. And this was one of those experiences. I, as a collector, do not collect the expensive machines. I can't afford to, and it also just goes against my philosophy of typewriter rescue. And so when I find machines like this, I'm always hoping that they're in my price range, but I'm also very aware that they're extremely collectible. I've also not heard great things about the Olivetti Valentine as far as how well it holds up or how well it types, but just to be able to hold one and see one in person, I thought was very cool as a typewriter collector. I see pictures of them all the time. I never thought I'd see one in person. And I still didn't see one in person because I didn't open the case, and I don't know why I didn't do it. I then took pictures of these items and took them up to the front in order to ask the owner how much these would cost. Now, this process is a little bit odd in my opinion. I showed her the pictures of the items I wanted to get prices for, specifically an Olivetti Valentine. They also had another Olympia there, just to kind of get an idea of what this would cost. She wrote them down on a piece of paper and then disappeared into the back and came back 5 minutes later with her price list. And this is where you kind of become aware of what type of salvage yard this is, and this is not for thrifty people like myself. So the Olivetti Valentine she had listed at $375 and the Olympia was $175. Now, for collectors, $375 for a fully serviced, pristine condition Olivetti Valentine is something that you would see on eBay. That is not unreasonable compared to online prices, but for actual use and actual resale, and for someone like me who is not gonna purchase at that price, it seemed like a lot. The Olympia was also listed at $175. Now, in an antique store, I kind of would expect these prices. I think something about the environment there made me feel like maybe things would be a little bit more affordable just because they had so much stock and it was such a large place, and how could they possibly know what every item was in there? But when the prices came back, that was my cue to leave. I didn't get to check inside the Olivetti. I didn't check some of those other cases, and I'm kind of glad I didn't, because if something went wrong and I accidentally dropped something or wasn't able to get the case back together, I would not be able to afford groceries for a while. And I think this does say something about the types of places that we look for typewriters. I've had good luck in some antique malls buying typewriters. My antique mall back where my parents live is very affordable when it comes to buying typewriters. I've bought them there for $25, and I've done that multiple times. And when I go to places like the Poconos where I live, or I go to places like New Jersey or New York, the prices instantly increase. And I think it says a lot more about the local market than it does about antique malls in general, because you can find good deals in some of these places. But when you go to a higher end place, something like New Jersey's Antique Emporium or Salvage by the Sea, the prices are set there by the local market, and they're just a little bit more high end. So finding prices like this, is not as shocking in some of these environments as it might be on Facebook Marketplace or at a yard sale. So if you're looking for cheap typewriter deals like I do, some of the places you might have better luck is things like yard sales, estate sales, and flea markets. Anywhere they have to pack up everything after they're done, you can negotiate a little bit more on price. Big salvage yards like this or antique malls have dedicated space where things are inside and they can sit for as long as they need to until someone's willing to pay that price. So I did learn a lot about the market specifically in these areas. I have not had as much luck at big places like this or giant antique malls in expensive cities as I have had in other places. So I think if you are looking for a typewriter and you want an affordable deal, you might have to wait a little bit. And that's the other tip I have here for getting good deals on typewriters is to be patient. You never know what's going to pop up on Facebook Marketplace, or going to every flea market, you might run into an affordable one eventually. I've had a really good luck at flea markets. In fact, I just picked up a typewriter yesterday for 20 bucks. So waiting a while in between machines or being very patient is a really great way to get better deals. If you're looking for something specific though, you might have to go to online retailers and you are going to pay for it when you go to those environments. But that all depends on what type of collector you would like to be and how you'd like to get your typewriters. And of course, after my experience of being kind of flabbergasted by how expensive things were and very thankful that I didn't break anything, I then went to the beach. If you're interested in other typewriter content, I do some other videos on this YouTube channel as well as an Instagram at just.my.typewriter. And thank you all so much for watching, and remind you, you're just my typewriter.